On the last night before leaving the palace, Xiao Zhao got drunk and favored me. The next day, I put a palace maid in his bed to fill the space. For years later, the child held my husband's hand and called him uncle sweetly. With red eyes, he asked aggrievedly, "Sister, how can she call me uncle?" I smiled and said, "But she is really my husband's daughter. So what else can I call you, if not uncle?"
1.
On the last night I left the palace, I took away a seed from Xiao Zhao's body. But when he asked me, I didn't admit it. That day was the last time we met. In the cold and tidy imperial study, he rubbed his temple and asked me, "Sister, I was drunk last night and vaguely felt that you were here. Was I seeing things?" I bowed respectfully and said, "I was not on duty last night. I was packing my luggage in the room. I think Xiaolin looks a bit like me. Your Majesty, you must have made a mistake. Xiaolin is the new female tea-serving official who will take over my job after I leave. She comes from a decent family, being the daughter of the right prime minister. Although she is a concubine, she is only slightly lower than her elder sister and is better than most of the ladies in the capital. But the bad thing was that her elder sister Qiao Qiushuang was going to be made a noble concubine soon, and she didn't want her to live a comfortable life. So she tipped off her father and sent her to the imperial court as a spy. Everyone knows that being a spy can't be a good job. She lives cautiously every day, so after sleeping with Xiao Zhao last night, I went to find her. I said to her, "Do you want to be rubbed like this by your elder sister for the rest of your life? Or do you want to climb onto that bed today and be my substitute, but also get a chance for yourself?" The girl's eyelashes trembled a few times, and she bowed and said, "Thank you, Auntie." Then he took off his clothes without hesitation and lay down on the small pool of blood. He is a smart and capable person.
2.
Xiao Zhao was still looking at me. I could feel the intensity of his gaze without even looking up. After a long while, he said calmly, "Today is the day my sister leaves the palace. The scenery in the south of the Yangtze River is pleasant. You will like it. It is not convenient for me to send you there, so let Xiao Qianzi send you there." I asked for the last time, "Does your Majesty really want me to leave?" He stopped talking and I understood. I turned around and walked out towards the palace gate, facing the bright sunshine. Many people looked at me along the way, probably because I was finally leaving and would no longer be the only aunt who could freely enter and leave the imperial study. They began to talk louder. "Aunt Lizzie is leaving just like that? Didn't His Majesty say that he would keep her forever? The concubines are the ones who stay in the harem for life. She is 5 years older than your Majesty. How can she stay? It's a pity that Empress Qiao kindly found a marriage for her, but she is too proud to accept it. I heard that the other party is a general, the same age as her. Although she is a second wife, she is also the principal wife of a third-rank official. Alas, you've given up on such a good marriage and always used the relationship you've endured together in the cold palace for 8 years to justify it in front of His Majesty. Look, when I accidentally hurt Madame Qiao's hand, His Majesty just drove her away. If you use too much relationship, it will also make people hate you. Watch your mouth. At the very least, His Majesty has rewarded her with 1,000 taels of silver. She can live a rich life anywhere. Isn't that better than us?" Xiao Qianzi wanted to shout at them to stop them, but I waved my hand. Only by listening to these words could I leave with more determination. He said with a sad face, "Sister, are you really leaving? Actually, the capital is also very good. I have a house in the west of the city where you can live. If you think His Majesty can still find a way to let you enter the palace, why do you have to go to the far south of the Yangtze River?" I pointed to a palace we passed by and said, "Qianshengqian. Do you remember that place?" He fell silent for a moment. That was the place where Xiao Zhao and I lived together for 8 years. 3. My name is lychee. My mother said it was the sweetest fruit she had ever eaten. She hoped that my life would be as sweet, so she gave me this name. But there might not be such fruit in heaven, and God didn't understand. So He sent me into the palace as a slave at the age of 15. The year I entered the palace, I shouldn't have served Xiao Zhao. The nanny said that I had a good-looking face and that I should get in front of those favored princes and earn a good future for myself. But my mother taught me since I was a child that I would rather be an ordinary man's wife than a concubine of a rich man. A concubine in the heavenly family is also a concubine. So, I used money and asked the eunuch in charge of dividing the people to give me to the youngest ninth prince. Xiao Zhao was only 10 years old, and a plate of cakes was more attractive to him than a woman. By the time he grows up, I would be an old maid and would not be attracted to him at all. Xiao Zhao is a good master. I just did my duty as a palace maid. I gave him more clothes when it was cold, lit a lamp for him at sunset, and during the coldest time of winter, I warmed the quilt myself before letting him sleep. He was willing to share half of everything he had with me. Lizzie, no one has ever been as nice to me as you are. Those who came before always pretended not to hear my requests. You are such a good person. His eyes flashed with sincerity as he spoke while putting the meat and vegetables that he had received as a reward during the Mid-Autumn Festival into my bowl. Who would have thought that in the emperor's family, his son could only have 2 bowls of good meat during the new year? I had never thought about it before I came here. It turns out that the prince, whose mother died early and who was disliked by his father, lived a life worse than the children of wealthy families. But even with such a small amount of food, Xiao Zhao stubbornly wanted to give me half of it. If I didn't eat it, he wouldn't eat it either. He was just like my mother, who would give me most of a steamed bun all those years ago. So when the disaster struck, he subconsciously held my hand tightly and wouldn't let go. I let him hold my hand like that, and we were sent to the cold palace together. In those days of food and clothing shortages, we ate all the grass in the yard. We used a few broken bowls to plow the bare yard and then sowed grass seeds. Later, I was lucky enough that birds brought me seeds of several kinds of flowers. I learned a little about beekeeping and honey collection from a beekeeper in the countryside. After working hard for half a year, I finally tasted my first bite. For this bite of honey, my head was stung all over, and my eyes were so swollen that I could hardly see Xiao Zhao's tearful face. He touched my burning forehead and desperately banged on the door of the cold palace. Xiao Qianzi was a eunuch guarding the gate at that time. As a child who had just entered the palace, his heart was always not hard enough. He gritted his teeth and stomped his feet to block the way of the young imperial physician Qin Shi. I was lucky. The person he was betting on was the future world's #1 doctor, and he saved my life easily. Later, as the honey became more and more abundant, I asked Xiao Qianzi to sell it secretly. Xiao Zhao was even more ruthless and simply gave Xiao Qianzi the nickname, Money Makes Money, hoping that this way of making money would last forever. By now, Xiao Zhao has become the most honorable person in the world. Xiao Qianzi has changed his name to Qian and become the chief steward. Qin Shi's medical skills are also famous throughout the world, and only I have to leave the palace in disgrace.
4.
Qiao Shuang was also waiting at the entrance of the palace, smiling brightly as she said, "I'm so sorry, sister. I didn't expect that His Majesty would drive you away just because of a broken hand. After all, we've been friends for almost 10 years. Are you sad?" She raised her injured hand high up like a victorious peacock and whispered in my ear, "You are lucky that the poisoned wine didn't kill you. It turns out that you are not that important in His Majesty's heart. You are just a lowly palace maid. This is the result of your wishful thinking." She finally admitted that she had deliberately fallen down the stairs in public that day, and that I didn't push her. Unfortunately, no matter what I said at the time, Xiao Zhao didn't believe it. In front of everyone, he raised his hand and slapped me, his eyes full of disappointment, and he said, "Sister, how did you become like this?" It was probably from that day that the whole palace changed its attitude. Everyone used to say that Xiao Zhao valued me, but it turned out that Miss Qiao was the one he loved the most. Then, Xiao Zhao wrote me an imperial edict, saying that I was old, and gave me 1,000 taels of silver, asking me to leave the palace and find a good family. I looked at the smug Qiao Shuang and laughed out loud. "Miss Qiao, don't worry. Although I am leaving, I have left you a big gift. Don't cry when you receive it." The maidservant beside her immediately stepped forward and tried to slap me in the face. "How dare you? My young lady is the imperial concubine. You should address her as madam. Xiao Qianzi leaned forward slightly to protect me, but I pushed the hand away and said, before the ceremony of enthronement, I am just a little girl. When the ceremony is held, I can no longer see you, so I won't call you madam anymore. Looking at Xiao Qiushuang's livid face, I finally felt a little better. I never put myself in a difficult position, Xiao Zhao. Since I raised him, I will sleep alone for the first time. If you hate Xiao Qiushuang, I will give Xiao Qilin a chance. They are both daughters of the Qiao family, and the right prime minister will not care which one is favored. Let the sisters fight among themselves.
5.
Xiao Zhao wanted to send me to Jiangnan, which is his mother's hometown, and there are people who can take care of me. Unfortunately, nothing goes smoothly in life. Halfway through the journey, the seed I stole sprouted. My period hadn't come, and I started vomiting. In order to get rid of those secret spies, I went to Tongcheng. The best doctor in the world, the one I trust the most, is there right now. Chen sure looked like he had seen a ghost when he saw me. The gates of the imperial palace are so lax now. How can a little girl like you who can't fight escape from the palace? What? Did His Majesty offend you? I didn't reply, but held out my hand and said, take my pulse. If it's a girl, give me a medicine to keep the baby. If it's a boy, give me a medicine to induce abortion. He was so shocked that he immediately came to take my pulse. After he finished, he sighed, it's only been a month. Even if my master came back to life, he wouldn't be able to tell the gender of the baby. I smiled and said, I don't want the result, but I want you to say what you just said to those who want to know. Xiao Zhao understands me very well. If it is a girl, there will be no problem in inheriting the throne because of my mother. I will definitely give birth to the child and raise him. But if it is a boy, there will be endless troubles in the future, so as long as I don't plan to return to the palace, I will definitely not give birth to the child. I told him that if he wished, I would never go back in my life.
6.
Xiao Zhao and I have always wanted to be a loving couple. We didn't know how to tell fortunes in those years, so we couldn't predict that the throne would fall into the hands of a prince under house arrest. All we wanted to do was to try our best to survive. We searched every inch of that dilapidated palace to find more useful things. Everything else was fine, but a letter on the beam caught Xiao Zhao's attention. Judging from the preface of the notebook, it was left by a learned palace concubine who was so familiar with the history of Dezhao that she could mention it at will. The emperor's literary and military achievements, the essence of the political reforms of her ministers, the people's wealth and migration, were all organized in the booklet according to a certain pattern. She was also very casual. When writing about some ridiculous people, she would spend whole pages cursing them. Xiao Zhao couldn't even understand some of the vulgar words she used. But this did not stop him from spending all his time outside of work immersing himself in these notebooks. He excitedly said to me, Sister, this writer is so amazing. Her insights are more profound than the tutor appointed by my father. Let's read together and become as amazing as her. He was 11 years old that year, and he stubbornly insisted on calling me Ajay. He said that only family members would never be separated. But when he was 18, the tone of his voice when he called me Ajay slowly changed because he began to understand the second half of the notebook. The writing in the second half is very fragmented, with the palace concubine writing about her time with her lover, and people can feel their happiness from those details. She praised that the Xiao family was full of romantic men, some of whom married widows as queens, and some of whom had only one concubine in their harem throughout their lives. For the sake of their loved ones, the emperors dared to do many things that were not in accordance with ancestral rules, and her husband would definitely be able to do it too. But at one point, she said that the Xiao family was full of scum, who forgot their promises and abandoned their lover, and because they were afraid of her lover's ability, they trapped her in this small place. Those words were so hateful that one could tell at a glance how tragic their breakup was. After reading the details of our love, Xiao Zhao covered his chest and said to me, Sister, I don't want you to do these things with others. Whenever I think of him, I want to kill him. If you want to do it, you can only do it with me. He looked at me with desire in his eyes, and I knew that he had grown up and he really didn't want me to be just a sister. But at that time I didn't know what I thought of him. Apart from my mother, he was the person who had been with me the longest in this world. If it weren't for each other, we would probably have become crazy in this broken palace. But is that love? I don't understand. Until the door of the cold palace opened without warning and Xiao Zhao sat in that high position, I was no longer the only person beside him. Eunuchs, palace maids, and the beautiful girls forced by the ministers all lingered around him like an endless stream of water. The anxiety and the tyranny of wanting to drive everyone away in my heart told me that it didn't matter whether I loved him or not. I wanted him all to myself, just like I did in the cold palace before. I said to him, "Xiao Zhao, I don't want to be your elder sister anymore. I want to be the queen you marry in a formal ceremony." He was so happy that day. He held me in his arms and ran to every corner of Chonghua Temple. Under the moonlight, in a deserted place, he kissed me and promised me, "Sister, I won't let you regret this. I will make you my queen, and we will be together forever. I will do everything for you that those Xiao family lovers have done." The promise he made that day is still ringing in my ears. But in just 2 years and for only 1,000 taels of silver, he wants to send me out of the palace. I guess I spoiled him too much and never let him feel any pain. But it doesn't matter. This time, I will make him suffer so much that he will never forget it for the rest of his life.
7.
That guy Qin Shi is getting more and more greedy. From what I have seen, he wants to take away most of my wealth. He said, "Miss Liqi, I'd lose my head if I kept this secret from you. I deserve this little money." I wanted to hit him twice, but when I turned around and saw the backyard full of little brats, I withdrew my hand. When Xiao Zhao ascended the throne, I granted Qin Shi a wish because he had saved me. He did not ask for himself, but for the daughter of a military commander named Pei Yin, so that she could be qualified to go to the battlefield openly. After Xiao Zhao's brothers had all fought to the death, all the officials welcomed Xiao Zhao to be the emperor. The officials headed by the right prime minister just wanted him to be a puppet on the throne. Sending a woman to the battlefield was the first battle that Xiao Zhao fought against the civil and military officials of the entire court. We fought hard, but we won. Now, Pei Yin is the commander of Beiguan. Tongcheng is the safest town near Beiguan. Qin Shi came here 2 years ago to grow medicinal herbs, treat illnesses, and take care of children. A child whose parents died in the war. He does need money. I asked, "Give it to you. Do you know how to make more money?" His eyes lit up. I forgot that the girl is good at making money.
8.
I took over half of Qin Shi's medicinal land and used it to grow the beauty and cosmetic herbs loved by the noble ladies in Beijing. He said to me anxiously, "Miss Liqi, this won't work. The soldiers on the front line need medicine for their wounds." I rolled my eyes at him. Before they get hurt, the frontline soldiers are first and foremost individuals. They need food, clothes, and life-saving armor and weapons. Do you think Xiao Zhao can get these for general pay from those dog officials after he even drove me out? Since the court has delayed paying the army, money is much more important than your herbs. Dr. Chen, you are good at growing herbs, but leave the logistics of the army to me. I grew up in a merchant family. After leaving the cold palace, I was in charge of internal affairs for 2 years. I know best how to make money from those nobles. Qin Shi was very conflicted, but he could win the argument with me, and I forced him to write some recipes for facial cream and lip balm to nourish the skin. 10 days later, I took the finished products and a maid and walked into a brothel. The owner of this brothel was a former courtesan. She has more conscience than others and does not force girls to sell their bodies, so the business is not very good. No matter how much the men flatter the courtesans, they will not be able to get what they want and will always be unwilling to spend a lot of money. But the people inside are just what I need. They are pretty but not stunningly beautiful. Those with truly stunning looks cannot be kept here. They also understand poetry and etiquette and can talk eloquently, but they don't often sell their bodies, so they have a less worldly air. In fact, compared to men, the wives who are in charge of the inner houses in the capital are more suitable to be their customers. I will let them try the facial cream and lip balm for a period of time, and then with their well-maintained delicate faces and rosy lips, they can attract the attention of those noble ladies. After hearing my plan, Mother Feng's eyes lit up. She said tentatively, "My lady is very talented, but you should know that prostitutes are lowly. According to the rules, it is difficult for them to get a pass to travel around. It is difficult to get a pass, but it is not impossible to get." She brought up this topic to ask for a promise from me, a promise to help the girls in the building get rid of their citizenship. No matter how elegant they prostitutes are still prostitutes after all. Even if Mama Fong in this building doesn't force them, there will always be some nobles who will force them, and even Mama Fong can do nothing about it. No woman comes in willingly, especially here, where all the women are from ancestors who committed crimes and have been confined to the music industry for generations. Even if they have money, they cannot redeem themselves. The book of confinement is like a mountain pressing down on them. The girls who were looking outside the door were bold enough to come in and say, "We know that the lady came from the miracle doctor. He is a good man, and you must be one too. If part of the money you earn can be used on those children, even if you can't get rid of your status, I will take this job." "What are you talking about? My wife hasn't even spoken yet." Mother Fong was anxious, but she was anxious for these girls. After the first one, the second and third girls came forward. They smiled bitterly and said, "We know that Mom is doing this for our own good, but it is so difficult to get rid of our citizenship. It requires the approval of the governor. This is the end of our life anyway. We might as well do something good for those poor orphans and build a good place for our next life." They were about to argue again, but I turned to the maid who came with me and asked, "General Pei, with such character, are they worthy of your help?" The scene suddenly became quiet. From Mother Fong to those girls, they all looked at Pei Yin excitedly. Unlike when they were facing me, there was only temptation and request in their eyes when facing Pei Yin. She admired him so much that she didn't even dare to speak. After a while, Mother Fong stood up and said, "General Pei is a role model for us women. If it is what you want to do, we in Mingfeng Tower will do it even if we die." Pei Yin bowed and replied, "Business is what Miss Lizzie is good at. I am just helping out. The girls are so kind. I will not let you work for nothing. As for the governor, I will find a way." 9. When I left, Pei Yin asked me why I was doing all this. She is a heroic and courageous woman. She always puts protecting the peace of Baiguan and ensuring the survival of the soldiers first. She does not stand on our side regardless of whether we are right or wrong just because we helped her in the past. Before I met her, it was hard for me to imagine that a gentle man like Qin Shi would like such a strong-willed woman. They were a good match, but he still had a long way to go. If I want her to believe in me, I have to make her respect me on an equal footing rather than just treating me as a profit-seeking businessman. I looked at the people hurrying along the street and said, "General, you are from the capital, so you should know the look on the faces of the people who have enough food. You are marching and fighting to keep them safe, so I will make sure they have enough food and clothing. How do you think?" Pei Yin looked at me with emotion in her eyes, but she insisted again, "Miss Lychee, what do you want?" I touched my belly and replied, "I want a backer. As long as I don't bring disaster to the country and the people, General Pei, you and Baiguan must be my support unconditionally." Almost without hesitation, she answered, "If you can really let the people here live like the people in the capital, you will be their heaven. You don't need us to say anything. We will be your backer." After saying that, she turned around and looked at the sign of Mingfeng Tower and asked me another question. "Although most of the righteous people are butchers, how did Miss Lizzie know that there are so many loyal and righteous people hiding here in Tongcheng in just a short time?" I also looked at the sign and said, "I'm lucky. I once got a hairpin here."
10.
When I was 15, I killed someone and ran away from home. The person who was killed was my father, Yu Tianyang, the master of the third branch of the Yu family, a wealthy merchant family in the north. That was the 3rd year after my mother took me away from the Yu family. We settled down in a small mountain village next to Tongcheng. Although we no longer had monthly income and had to work hard to make a living, no one beat my mother anymore or hysterically blamed her for my aunt's death. My mother was originally just a little maid in the outer courtyard of the Yu mansion. Her biggest wish in life was to save money to redeem herself. She saved money very diligently. If there was any work that other maids couldn't do, she was willing to do it as long as she was paid. Yu Tianyang was hosting a banquet in the outer courtyard that day. A little maid who was serving wine and food suddenly had her period and was in unbearable pain, so she gave money to her mother to go. They drank too much, and those bad friends began to laugh at Yu Tianyang for being afraid of his wife like a tiger and being a coward, which was why he didn't have any concubines or maids in the inner courtyard. Yu Tianyang was very proud and naturally refused to admit it. Someone pointed at his mother, who just came in with wine, and said maliciously, "I think this little girl is pretty. If you are not afraid of your tigress, take her in today. Do you dare?" Maybe it was the alcohol that made him daring, or maybe he had wanted to do this for a long time, but he used alcohol as an excuse, and my mother had no choice but to let him rape her. My mother said that actually my aunt was a good person and had never made things difficult for me. She just wanted to leave and didn't want to have this husband who had broken his promise anymore. But she couldn't leave. No one supported her. Everyone thought that it was no big deal for a man to be like this, even though it was Yu Tianyang who took the initiative to make the promise and she agreed to marry him. When they were at their most embarrassing, it wasn't just my mother. Yu Tianyang also took in many concubines. He wanted to let Annie know that he was the head of the Yu family, and no matter what he did, Annie would have to compromise. People without hope will wither. The old lady's spirit became weaker day by day. After holding on for 3 years, she finally died of depression. Even after the person died, Yu Tianyang's deep affection suddenly returned. He blamed my mother, saying that it was my mother who put drugs in the wine, which distracted him from his aunt. From then on, beating, scolding, and insulting my mother became commonplace. When I was a child, I was afraid, and my mother always held me in her arms to comfort me. Later, I realized that being afraid was useless, so I sharpened a piece of iron into a sharp point and imagined countless times what it would feel like if I inserted it into his neck. When my mother found the piece of iron, she cried. She threw it far away, touched my head, and said, "Be good, I'll take you away. Promise me that you won't have this thought. We Lizzie must live a clean life in this world." She didn't want me to dirty my hands, so she took me away. I changed my surname to he, following hers, and used the nickname Lizzie, which she only dared to call secretly, as my name. I spent the happiest 3 years of my life in a small mountain village. But Yu Tianyang would not let us go. He came looking for us. My mother dragged his legs and begged him not to hit me. He kicked my mother onto the millstone in the yard. My mother would never move again. I swung the sickle with bloodshot eyes to make him unable to move either. I wanted to be buried with my mother in that yard, but she said to me with her last breath, "Lychees are sweet. My daughter, your life must be sweet too." Because of this sentence, I ran as fast as I could, but there were too many people chasing me, and I ran to the back door of Mingfeng Tower in a daze. At that time, Mother Feng was still a lady named Feng Qianyang. Something had just happened in her family, and that was the first night she became a prostitute. She opened the door with a look of despair, and her hair was messy. I didn't know what she was going to do, but she found me. She dragged me away in fear, took off the pearl hairpin on her head, handed it to me, and said, "Go. Go quickly. As a woman, never go near here." Later, I used the hairpin to exchange for a fake household registration, sneaked into the palace maid selection, successfully escaped the pursuit of the Yu family, and went to Xiao Zhao. When she came back, Feng Qianyang was already Mother Feng. Time had passed, and she had become more sophisticated, but her heart was still as soft as ever. When we met again, even though she didn't recognize me, I still had to repay her for the kindness she had shown me. 11. While Chen Shi was taking the children to deliver the goods, I compiled a list of the most beautiful and popular ladies in the capital and taught Qianyang and the others in detail how to deal with them. They were accustomed to welcoming and seeing off guests and learned it very well. By the time they took the first batch of goods and 1,200 taels of silver to the capital, my belly was already slightly bulging, and Chen Shi said he could tell the boy or girl. After hearing the results, I stayed in his clinic for half a month and made a decision that made me very satisfied. After that, good news came from the capital city one after another. The shop opened by Qianyang and her friends successfully became the most popular perfume and powder shop in the capital city. The facial and lip balms in the shop were extremely precious, and it was difficult to get a box. In her letter, Qianyang asked me whether I wanted to open more shops in the capital. I rejected this suggestion and asked her to send some girls to Jiangnan, where a good official had recently arrived and where the business was not as complicated as in the capital, where all the shops had officials as owners. The capital city, from the very beginning, I just wanted to use the reputation of the noble lady to make a name for myself. Our shop should just bypass it and open in other prosperous places with clean government. It just so happened that I used to go in and out of the imperial study before, so I knew the dispatch of officials very well. Besides, those ladies are too full to eat, and what they love is a sparse meal, so let them stretch their necks and wait. To make sure I could make money, I asked Chinshi to take me to visit the fields in Baiguan. The climate here is dry and cold, and the grain output is very low, but there are many medicinal herbs that can be grown. In the past, the army could not afford the money for medicine, so Chinshi could only find ways to grow crops on his own. Now I have recruited experienced farmers and divided the land into different types. Those who can grow crops can still grow crops, and those who cannot can all get medicinal seedlings and learn how to grow medicinal herbs from Chinshi. Those children were so happy that they felt they had become useful people. As for the medicinal herbs, I planted half of them for wound medicine, and I bought them at the market price and gave them to Payine. I used the other half to plant the herbs needed for another spring, and to sell them to herbal medicine shops all over the country to make money. After I made money, I would go to the nearest grain-producing town near Baiguan to buy land and collect grain, ensuring that the people of Baiguan could buy rice and flour with their money. Chinshi also wanted to do this before, but with his eloquence and the way he did things, no villagers believed him. He didn't know how to deal with these people who worked hard all day long, but I did. While wandering around, I met a man named Zhao who looked 50% like Xiao Zhao. He lived in the mountains, hunting for a living, and he was still unmarried at the age of 20. I took him home, washed him, kept him at home, and hired a teacher to teach him to read and write. Chinshi was so scared that he was sweating all over and asked me, "Aunt, what are you trying to do? If the person in the palace finds out, it will be fatal." I said without comment. He was the one who ordered me to find a good family. What? Isn't Xiao Hu good enough? What's more, in today's Baiguan, any news that I don't want to spread will definitely not be spread. When the villagers really saw money in their pockets, Pei-in came to ask me again, "Sister Lizzie, what do you want me to do for you? Just tell me and I will do it." I looked up from the account book and smiled at her. "I'm waiting for someone to fall into my trap. When I see him, I need you to do me a favor with your life at stake. Don't run away when the time comes."
12.
Time flies, and I have to wait for 3 years. That day, I held the hand of little Magpie while we were buying tofu pudding. As a toddler, everything she saw was new and interesting, so I teased her, "Look, your favorite tofu pudding is made by this uncle. Come on, call uncle." Xiao Zhao suddenly appeared at this time. He looked like Xiao Hu, and Xiao Shike was more familiar. The child couldn't tell who I asked her to call uncle, and she kept shouting at Xiao Zhao, "Uncle, uncle." He looked at the little magpie's face that looked like his, and his eyes suddenly turned red. He squatted down and wanted to reach out to hug her, but was afraid of scaring her. Finally, he looked up at me aggrievedly. "Sister, she called me uncle. How could she call me uncle?" Obviously, he misunderstood, thinking that this was his and my child. I didn't bother to talk nonsense, so I turned around and shouted, "Who? Your daughter is looking for you. Why don't you come over here quickly?" The slave girl who was left behind bargaining with the vegetable vendor heard the magpie coming and quickly came over and said, "What's the matter? What does my daughter want to eat? Daddy will buy it for you." As he spoke, he skillfully picked up the child and stood next to me. Anyone with eyes could see that we were a warm family of 3. But Xiao Zhao seemed to have no eyes and asked persistently, "Sister, who is he?" I didn't answer. The vendor selling tofu pudding next to me laughed and said, "You are such a tactless guy. Of course it's her husband. They have been married for 3 years and they love each other so much. They come to buy my tofu pudding every few days." Xiao Hu then noticed Xiao Zhao and whispered in my ear, "Madam, who is this?" I held his hand and said frankly, I told you before, I have a foster brother in Beijing. Hey, that's him. Maybe he's free at home. So, he came to see me. The fool smiled innocently and said, so it's my brother-in-law. Come on, let's go to my brother-in-law's house. I'll have a couple of drinks with you. If Xiao Zhao could still tolerate Zhao Hu when he approached me, but when he said wife, brother-in-law and saw our clasped hands, there was only sinisterness in his eyes. After serving as a king for many years, he had grown up and did not lose his temper in front of the people on the whole street. He followed the enthusiastic Zhao Hu all the way into my house, then separated my hand and Zhao Hu's hand, snatched the little magpie, and forcefully pulled me into the house. Zhao Hu wanted to stop him, but a group of palace guards descended from the sky and stopped him. The little magpie was suddenly out of her familiar embrace and burst into tears out of shock. Xiao Zhao wiped her tears with a distressed look on his face and said, Dear, Daddy didn't mean it. Wait for Daddy to take you back to the palace, and you can choose any treasure in the palace, okay? The more he talked, the harder the little magpie cried. My dad is outside. I want my dad. I want my dad. Xiao Zhao looked at me complainingly. Sister, if you are angry, you can hit me and scold me, but how can you let our daughter call someone else dad? He still talked to himself and thought that this was his child. 13. I laughed in anger and pulled the little magpie over and said, Your Majesty has seen few children, so you probably can't tell that my magpie is only 2 years old. I have been away from the palace for 4 years, so I really can't give birth to a 2-year-old child like you. And her face is exactly like her father's, but her father is lucky enough to look a little like you, so don't get me wrong. She pretended to be relaxed from the moment we met, deliberately ignoring the fact that I was the one who was driven away. At this moment, her face turned pale, and she stared at me like a wolf before going mad, saying, Sister, don't force me. Tell me, this is not your child. You are lying to me. I replied calmly, Zhao Hu and I got married 3 years ago. The whole street came to the buffet. Chen Shi diagnosed the pregnancy pulse and Lu, the midwife from the east of the city, delivered the baby. If your Majesty doesn't believe me, go ask them one by one if this is my husband's daughter, the daughter I gave birth to after 10 months of pregnancy. I felt that his face was not bleak enough, so I continued. Before, it was sister who forced you to do it. Now I have listened to you, found a good family, and I truly love him. Zhao, you will bless me, right? Really love you? What about me? What about our child? Chen Shi clearly said that you are pregnant, but she is not. What about our child? There was a hint of madness on his face, and the whereabouts of the child was like the last thread holding him back. I asked, Do you regret it? Do you regret driving me away regardless of my wishes? In that situation, even if I can't survive in the end, sister, I still want you to live. This was his answer. He was saying he had no regrets. I carried the little magpie out to give to Zhao Hu, then came back and took out a box from the incense table, handed it to him and said, Since you don't regret it, then don't regret it to the end. Didn't you ask about our child? He's here. I said long ago that if it's a boy, I don't want it. In all these years, have you ever seen my sister brag? The box contained a male fetus that was almost fully formed, but it had dried up over the years. He opened it, threw it far away, figured out what it was, and took it back. Tears fell uncontrollably. The hands gently stroked it, and he said in disbelief, Sister, you are so cruel. You are so cruel. As he finished speaking, a mouthful of blood spurted out of his mouth, and the emperor, who was cheered, Long live the emperor, just fell straight down. 14. Xiao Zhao was carried away by the group of guards. At the same time, a large group of people surrounded my yard. Zhao, who was also taken away by them, leaving only the little magpie to me. 2 days later, Qiao Chulin came to see me first. She is now the most favored concubine in Xiao Zhao's harem. In recent years, even the people in Beiguan know that the emperor favors concubine Qiao alone. Whatever she likes, His Majesty will order horses from all over the country to send it to the capital at full speed. But at this moment, she stood in front of me properly, saluted me respectfully as she did before leaving the palace, and said, After 4 years, Chulin thanks Anne again. It was you who gave me the opportunity to join hands with His Majesty to uproot the Xiao family and take my mother out of the palace. I helped her up and said, "You are too polite, my lady. This is your own ability. Today, I am not worthy of your courtesy." I didn't say anything polite. If it wasn't for her own plan, which made Xiao Qiushuang stupid enough to suggest sending her to the imperial court, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to observe that she was a useful talent. She took a step back, still acting respectfully, and said, "Others may not know the story between me and your Majesty, but you do know it. I came here today because I want to explain something to you on behalf of your Majesty. In the past 4 years, your Majesty and I have never overstepped the boundaries. I think you have heard that I am extremely domineering in the harem, and I always make trouble before every selection, which ruins it. Because my last name is Qiao, my beastly father is happy to do so. His Majesty has kept his promise to you." What she said was Xiao Zhao's promise that he would only have me in his life. It was beautiful, but it was never the promise I valued the most. I laughed at myself and said, "Hasn't he told you that I was the one who persuaded him to participate in the talent show?" 15. Being a puppet emperor is something that only people without ambitions can be happy with, but Xiao Zhao and I are neither of those people. At that time, the right prime minister thought that Xiao Zhao was sent to the cold palace at the age of 10 and was an uneducated fool. If he was promoted to be a good person and provided with good food and drink, the court would become the court of his Qiao family. Unfortunately, he overlooked the notebook and also overlooked me. I was thinking about killing my father when I was in my early 10 years old. I am not a good-tempered person. Xiao Zhao grew up with me and learned a lot of skills from the notebook. I didn't dare to think about it when I was in the cold palace, but when he had the country in his hands, he had his responsibilities to fulfill. I never think that I am above that responsibility. That responsibility involves thousands and thousands of people. A tiny person like me, or even a tiny person like him, cannot compare to me. But our foundation is too weak. The Qiao family has been in business for decades, but we have been training our people from scratch. If we don't have a talent show that year, we will have to pay a greater price. I took his hand and smiled. You have never lived in the common people. Every man has to endure some humiliation when working outside. I will regard this as the price you pay for making money to support your family. Ah Zhao, remember, it's not you who actively want someone else, so I don't blame you, but you have to promise me that the person closest to you can only be me, and if there is anyone in this world who can live and die with you, it can only be me. Being unique is beautiful, but I long for someone who will never leave me. I don't want to live alone in this world, like I did when I lost my mother. But Xiao Zhao drove me away, under the pretext of doing it for my own good, without even giving me room for negotiation. Thinking of this, I raised my voice and said, "Since he let me go, he should have thought that I might fall in love with someone else. As he wished, I am living a good life now. Your Majesty, please persuade him. The past is over. Let's let each other go." I knew Xiao Zhao was standing outside, and he could hear it. 16. He pushed the door open and came in. The madness from the past 2 days was no longer on his face. He motioned Xiao Chulin to leave, then sat down calmly and said, "Sister, pack up and come back to the palace with me tomorrow. The country cannot be without a ruler for a day. I cannot be out for too long." I nodded and said, "You should go back. I believe you have verified it all over the city in the past 2 days. Zhao Hu and I are really married, and Shike is my son. Please let us reunite as a family." "Okay, since Shike is your child, she is also my child. Let's take her with us and reunite as a family." As if he didn't understand what I meant, he continued talking to himself and still looked at me calmly. I repeated, "Your Majesty, at this moment, the person I love most is Zhao Hu, not you, and I will not go back with you." He was unmoved and said, "He's only been together for 3 years. We've been together for 10 years. As long as we can't see each other, your heart will always come back. What if I insist on not leaving? When I was 18, I said I would kill someone. Sister, don't force me. I can still let him go now. If you say it again, I won't be able to control myself. I don't want Shike to hate me in the future. I looked at him, took out a dagger, nodded and said, "Okay, then kill him. I'll go with him. We can always meet in the underworld." The moment the dagger stabbed his neck, he could no longer maintain his calm. I was a step slower, and his hand tightly grasped the blade. Blood dripped down, but not as red as his eyes. He threw away the dagger and hastily hugged my waist, his voice full of sadness and despair. "How could you die for another man? A Zhao is still alive. How could you die for another man? Sister, it hurts. Please teach me. How can we go back to the past?" I lowered my head, gently hugged his shoulders, and whispered in his ear, "Okay, Zhao, does it hurt? Then remember it well. Remember what kind of personality sister has, and remember that sister hates others making decisions for me. Otherwise, sister will make it even more painful for you." The sudden gentle tone made him look up in confusion. In the yard, Chinshi shouted at the top of his voice, "Miss Lychee, that's enough. If you keep going on like this, His Majesty will really die. If he hadn't spit out that blood 2 days ago, you would never see him again." After opening the door, Xiao Jin was standing there alone, looking at him curiously and asking, "Are you my father? The father that my mother said she would beat you up before letting me see you?" 17. When I left the palace, I knew that Xiao Zhao was scared. Xiao Shuang was a stupid person. She had just entered the palace at that time and thought Xiao Zhao treated me too well, so she was stupid enough to poison me directly. A smart person can maneuver, but a stupid person can stab you to death with just one knife. So Xiao Zhao was afraid. Even though he knew I would never want to leave, and even though my abilities were a great help to him, he still started playing that clumsy trick of ignoring me and driving me away just for Xiao Shuang. "You will always spoil the children you grew up with." I gave him a chance. That day I put some aphrodisiac in his wine, wanting to tell him that I was determined to stay. When the drug finally took effect, he would wake up, but he still pretended to be asleep. I knew that he had made up his mind to make me leave. I still love him, so I brought Xiao Qiulin into the game and left it to him. But I thought a lot during that period of time. What if he couldn't hold on during my absence? He was afraid of my death, but I was also afraid of his failure. I wondered if he was sure that I would come back after the matter was over. As I was thinking about it, I thought of my aunt. At that time, Yu Tianyang was sure that she had no ability to resist. Just like Xiao Zhao wanted me to leave, I had no way to do anything. I hate this feeling of not being able to control myself, even if he does it in the name of love. So, I made a decision. I would teach Xiao Zhao a lesson he would never forget and would never dare to control me again. He is afraid of my death, so I will make him experience something more terrible, such as dying in front of him for another man. This is not enough. Besides wanting him to never dare to lose me again, I also want power. Not even the emperor can easily control my power. It turns out that ability is useless unless it is transformed into power. I will not allow myself to experience the feeling of powerlessness when leaving the palace again. So I came to Beiguan to build up my own power. Until now, the people in this land have complete trust in me. I asked them to play a trick with me, and they were able to make Xiao Zhao believe without a single mistake that I was married and had a child. As for Xiao Jin, he is my own flesh and blood. I would have given birth to him with or without Xiao Zhao. Back then, I stayed in Chinshi's clinic for half a month before I saw a poor woman who had an unexpected miscarriage. I spent money to buy the embryo. Now that the lesson has been taught successfully, I should do the second thing. 18. The experience of having a father was very new to Xiao Jin. He was unwilling to go back to his room these past few days and insisted on sleeping between Xiao Zhao and me. Xiao Zhao also doted on him, holding his face and kissing him 17 or 18 times a day, not at all like the day he first found out, when he stood there like a fool, stammering and asking me, "Sister, is he calling me dad?" In the past few days, from the time he woke up to the time he went to bed, Xiao Jin probably called him dad 800 times, but he still enjoyed it. At this moment, he was teasing the child on the bed and said, son, who is more handsome, me or Uncle Zhao who? He emphasized the word uncle with extra emphasis. He still cared about the fright he received from Zhao Hu and little Shike, even though he already knew that Zhao Hu's wife was a girl from Mingfeng Tower and that they had fallen in love while doing business, got married, and had little Shike. Xiao Jin was also very supportive and shouted, "Dad. My dad is the best looking, better looking than all the other kids' dads in the city." It was so loud that Xiao Zhao felt a little sad. He looked at me and said, "Sister, I'm sorry. It must have been very difficult for you to raise Jiner all these years. I won't let him envy others for having a father anymore." I hummed and said, "But Xiao Zhao, I don't think I have agreed to go back with you." Whenever I called him by his full name, it meant that there was something very important to discuss. He would kiss Jiner and personally take the child back to his room. Then he came back, rubbing his chest exaggeratedly, and said, "Sister, Chinshur said that the heart disease I got from being scared has not healed yet, and I can't be stimulated again." I ignored him and asked seriously, "Xiao Zhao, what do you think of my management of Baiguan? With Pei Yin's support and my planning, the position of prefect here has been basically sidelined. I have been governing the place for the past few years, and there has been no problem at all." Seeing that I was talking about serious matters, he said seriously, "Very good. Even if I have worked very hard in the past few years, I may not be able to do as well as sister." I nodded. "Since you also think it's a good idea, let's go to court together after we return to Beijing. I don't want to be just a woman in the harem. Besides, there are no other women in your harem except me." Xiao Qilin and Pei Yin hit it off right away and decided to fake their death and stay here to do some things for me. There will really be no more women in his harem. After hearing this, he showed a relieved expression for the first time after we met again for such a long time. He looked at me and said seriously, "Okay, from now on, no matter what you ask for, as long as I have it, I will give it to you. You don't know how scared and that you will never ask for anything from me again." The candlelight flickered, and he agreed calmly but solemnly. I put my head on his shoulder and finally decided to forgive him completely. "Xiao Zhao, in this life I will walk by your side carrying the long sword of power. I believe that we will never fight each other in this life, but I will still carry this sword with me to warn you and myself." 19. On the day of leaving, all old friends came to see her off. Pei Yin went the farthest away. For her sake, Chinshur also rode his horse clumsily and lagged far behind. This eagle-like woman couldn't hide her excitement at all. She pulled me aside and rode away from Xiao Zhao, saying, "Sister Lizzie, I knew we were the same kind of people from the first time we met, but you're more imaginative than me. I thought you came to Baiguan to pave the way for returning to the palace and Jiner, but you actually wanted to attend the court. That means standing upright in the Golden Throne Hall as a woman. If this is the case, let alone risking my life, I will definitely help you even if it means losing my life in the next or the next. When I return to Beijing to compete with those old-fashioned people, Baiguan will be my biggest help." Naturally, I have to discuss it with Pei Yin. Ever since she heard about it, she has been so excited that she seems to have no need to sleep. I looked back at Chinshur and decided to help my old friend. I pushed her and said, "Forget about the next life. Let's talk about this life first. That silly goose will be almost 30 if we wait any longer. It won't be crispy and tender when chewed." "What? Do you like to eat old food?" Pei Yin was afraid of getting married. She was afraid that if she got married, the secular world would have an excuse to trap her in the mansion. But I think that in one's life, if you love someone, you should fight for him. If he betrays you, you should just stab him and leave. Only then can you live a life worthy of yourself. I deliberately laughed at her and said, "What's more, he is a doctor who can't even ride a horse steadily, female general. Why are you afraid of him?" Perhaps my courage infected her. Her face flushed with rosy clouds as she said, "Who said I'm afraid of him? I'll kill him when I get home today." "Sister is right. He's not as delicate as your majesty. We can't wait any longer." Pei Yin went to find her lover. Xiao Zhao rode his horse to catch up with me and said with a shameless smile, "Sister, I will try my best to stay tender, so let's have another daughter. A daughter who is cuter than a little magpie." I smiled and whipped his horse hard. The sunset was setting, and the scenery was really beautiful.
20.
The history of Dezhou. In the 6th year of Yongxi, Emperor Kangxing went to Beiguan to pick up Empress Cixing and the crown prince to return to the capital. They were attacked on the way. Concubine Xiao died while saving him, and the emperor was also left with a chronic illness. After returning to Beijing, the emperor's health deteriorated, so Empress Sheng handled some of the government affairs on his behalf. In the 8th year of Yongxi's reign, the government was stable and the people were harmonious. With the support of officials such as Pei Yin, the commander of the Northern Gate, Empress Sheng took over the throne on behalf of the emperor. For the rest of her life, the emperor and empress jointly controlled the government. 21. Extra.
Xiao Zhao.
My sister almost drank the poison wine from Xiao Zhao. If she had been less alert, she would have died in front of me. My sister didn't know. I said thank goodness in front of her, but I didn't have a good night's sleep for the whole month after that. I suddenly thought of Lu Bingyi and Su Pingjun. Lu Bingyi and Huoguang had never expected that while the two of them were fighting in the Front Dynasty, a woman from the Hor family would dare to poison Su Pingjun directly in the rear. I have never been afraid of dealing with an old man like Qiao He, but I am afraid of Qiao Qiushuang. A stupid and arrogant person. You can't guess her stupid moves, and she can't bear the consequences. Just like Lu Bingyi wiped out the Hor family Manchu clan, but Su Pingjun is still gone. The story of the old sword and the deep affection between them is beautiful. But I don't want my sister to become an ancient sword. I want her to be a living person. Even though this living person is not by my side.
Over.